Ed Wallis is the new kid in town who gets fascinated with his neighbor, Ashby Holt, who turns out to be an ex-assassin. As he gets entangled in Ashby's life, he also meets Alois, a brainy girl in his school he starts falling for. Ashby is driving his car in the neighborhood when he gets a stroke and passes out right before a stop sign, and his car crashes into a sidewalk. In Varga High School, the history professor Mr. Mark amuses his class by making a joke about their generation. He addresses the new student, Ed Wallis, and asks him about his thoughts on Hemingway. Ed is very well read, so the jocks in his class, especially Valchek, start calling him gay. Mr. Mark manages to curtly silence Valchek and continues his discussion with Ed about Hemingway. Ed then notes how the dominant theme seems to be proving to society that one is a man by taking extreme steps just to convince people. The professor is impressed by his answer and formally welcomes him to the class. His classmates in the football team are not impressed and throw paper balls at him. During an announcement about the football tryouts, Ed stares with utmost dedication at the poster for the tryouts and pictures of all the football players who graduated from the school. He walks towards his locker but notices the jocks coming out, so he immediately hides inside till they pass by. When he tries to get out of it, Alois, a student in the school, notices him and seems amused by his attempts at hiding. She introduces herself to Ed and learns that Ed is from Oregon. Ashby is getting an MRI scan and visits the doctor to learn about his diagnosis. Ashby knows he doesn't have much time left and directly asks the doctor about it. The doctor tries to sugarcoat it, but Ashby eventually learns that he has 3 months remaining. Ed arrives home on his bike, and as soon as he enters, he notices a strange man in his house enjoying himself. His mother emerges from below the counter and pretends she was finding something she lost. Ed knows what was happening and is already awkward, but greets Jerry, who apparently works with his mom, June. He goes straight to his room and spots his neighbor, Ashby, coming in from somewhere. Ed is dedicated and has prepared an elaborate setup to practice football before the tryouts. Tired after the practice, he sits with his mother, who feels awkward about earlier, but tries to strike up a conversation about their meal. When Ed seems distant, she insists that in a new place, they need to make friends. Ed agrees and tries to comfort his mother, whom he loves very much. That night, Ashby shivers in his house and stares at a picture of Jesus. The next time in class, the professor gives an assignment where the students are required to talk to an old person, find out interesting aspects of their past, and gain wisdom from them. Ed is excited about the project, and due to his love for history, he can't wait to get started. He immediately goes to his neighbor and disturbs him when he is watching TV. Ed introduces himself to Ashby and tells him about his school assignment. Ashby is not interested, but gets an idea. He asks Ed for help driving him around, in exchange for agreeing to talk to him. Fully prepared, Ed takes out his recorder and dives right into the questions, but he doesn't get very straightforward replies about Ashby's real age. Ashby is retired and informs Ed about his business of selling napkins. Ed is a little disappointed, but tries to redirect the conversation. They reach Ashby's spot, which is a bar, and he asks Ed to join him. In his school, Ed bangs his head on his locker when he hears about football tryouts happening soon. He sits down on the stands to observe the team and keeps staring at them. Alois then brings him back to reality and wonders what Ed is feeling while he looks at the team. He can't figure it out. Alois is observing the football team at regular intervals to study their brains and the impact of football hitting their head too many times. Her father is a neurologist, and she informs Ed about having an MRI machine in their house. While everyone else thinks she is weird, Ed is impressed with her, and they bond over this similarity. When he looks at the team again, Alois finally cracks it and knows he is looking at the team with longing. At home, Ed gets a message from his mom informing him that her date with another man, John, is stretching late, so she will see him in the morning. Ed seems frustrated and just shoves the tablet in the fridge. Ed gets a video call from his dad, Ted, who is in Florence. Ed is excited about meeting him and all the things they can do together, but Ted informs him that he will not be able to come see him since he is busy at work. Ed sounds disappointed and conveys how hard it is to be away from him. The next time he goes to drop Ashby somewhere, he has done his research on napkinola, related to corruption in the food services industry. He is ready to dive into Ashby's history, even if Ashby seems a little lost about whatever he is talking about. Ashby claims to have worked for the Sentinel Services for 35 years, and Ed wants all the dirt on the bribes or that were part of Ashby's life. They reach a graveyard, and Ashby pays a visit to the graves of his daughter and wife. He is emotional and disturbed when he returns to the car, but Ed doesn't seem to get the hint, and starts asking more questions. Ashby remembers the time when people had a sense of time and place, and the appropriate things to say. Ed realizes how insensitive he was being, and tries to be there for Ashby. They reach Ashby's house, where he lies down since he feels weak. Ashby asks Ed to get his pills and water from the hallway. While getting the pills, Ashby checks a drawer and finds multiple passports. He gives Ashby the pills, and when he passes out, he takes the opportunity to look around. At this point, Ed's curiosity has peaked, and he is excited about getting to know Ashby's real past so he can submit a groundbreaking essay. He goes back to his drawer again and checks all the passports. He starts exploring more and comes across certificates and pictures. When he opens a cabinet, he spots guns of all types, and a further look at other drawers reveals more weapons and syringes. Ed is shocked and hears his mother talking to someone downstairs in the house. He spots Ashby and picks up an umbrella on instinct to defend them. Ashby is politely engaging in conversation with June and discusses the problems in the neighborhood. June spots Ed coming down just when Ashby discusses a doctor's appointment and asks June if he can borrow Ed to drive him there. Ed is terrified to go with him, but cannot find an excuse. In the car, Ed tries to casually ask where Ashby's appointment is. Ashby then jokes about putting a bullet in Ed's head, which makes him panic, and Ed starts apologizing and promises to not tell anyone that Ashby is a retired assassin. Ashby casually informs Ed he never intended to shoot him, but just wants him to promise that he will not mention his profession in his report. Ed is relieved, but still slightly scared, so he looks at Ashby and promises to just write a report about him as a napkin salesman. Ashby then takes Ed for pancakes. Ed is over his fear and is excited to ask Ashby about his real past. He learns that Ashby has dispatched 93 people, but instead of being scared, he is more curious about how Ashby was assigned the jobs. Ashby has always worked methodically and executed the requests with minimal details about his targets, believing that they were all a threat to national security. Ed believes Ashby should have learned more about his targets. Ashby reveals that he was scared about what he had to do, but he convinced himself he was doing the right thing. Ashby explains how all his victims had the same look on their faces, which suggested that they knew they had it coming. But he hesitates when Ed asks if every single one of his victims had that look. At home, Ashby finds an old photo of one of his victims, Garrett Hughes, and searches him on the internet. He then realizes that his bosses had set him up and made him murder Garrett, who was innocent. Coach Bruton is giving a speech to everyone in the football team in their locker room about an upcoming match when Ed walks in and requests for a tryout. He is met with a lot of jeers from the team, and even the coach is in no mood to entertain him, since tryouts are over. Ed is about to walk away, but comes back and starts blabbering to the coach about the values of the school. No one was expecting this speech, so the coach asks him about the position he plays and decides to give him a chance. Ed reaches for the tryouts and aces them, and even Coach Wally and Coach Bruton are forced to admit Ed is very fast and smart and would be perfect for the team. Valchuk is angry since Ed being in the team threatens his chances. Ashby reaches a church and speaks to the priest about mortal sin and if he can get redemption for his wrongs. Ed gets a call from his father, who is proud he made the football team, and promises to be there for his game. Ed runs around Aloyse's house, and she finally catches up with him and asks about his intentions. He offers to let her look at his brain, even if she is a little hesitant, since he has become a footballer now, the kind of people she hates. Ed gets ready for the scan, and Aloyse offers to play soothing music for him. She shares an incident with him during the scan about how her mom passed away of a cerebral hemorrhage one day very suddenly. Ed feels bad, but Aloyse lovingly explains how hard it was for her dad, since they both were genuinely in love and very loyal to each other. After this, Ed tells her about Ashby being an assassin. Aloyse is curious about studying his brain and asks Ed about his traits. Ed describes how weird Ashby is with his tattoos, but that he likes him a lot. There is an awkward moment between them when they realize they are both very strange, but great for each other. When Ed is heading back home, Valchuk hits him hard on his head and warns him about coming to football practice. Ed meets Ashby and takes him to a mall, where Ashby sighs after looking at the place and learns that Garrett lost his life for this. He asks Ed to take him somewhere else. They drive up to Peter Frampton's house, one of Ashby's ex-bosses, and asks Ed to wait outside while he pays a visit to his friend. Ashby sneaks up on Peter, who is playing tennis alone. Ashby mentions Garrett and asks Peter if he was an enemy of the state. Peter confirms what he already knew, that Garrett was innocent, and they took advantage of Ashby to murder him. Peter doesn't understand why Ashby is mad about something that was his job. Ashby takes out a gun and shoots him while he is trying to defend himself. He comes back to a clueless Ed, who is playing with a cassette, and asks him to drive back. Ed is excited about getting selected in the football team and informs Ashby about it. Ashby notices the bruise on his face and learns how someone bullied him to not take his spot. Ashby encourages him to fight for himself and not let this go, since it might lead to more beatings for him. Ed then jokes about Ashby probably murdering the kid for him, but Ashby insists he has retired. When Ed seems like he has given up and continues to make excuses about not wanting to join the team, Ashby decides to teach him how to defend himself. He starts teaching him how to punch properly and keeps punching till Ed responds and punches him back hard. Ashby falls down and looks hurt, but is proud of Ed for being able to do that. Ashby decides to celebrate with a drink, and Ed pretends to drink, but throws it out before Ashby can notice. He asks for Ashby's advice with the bully, but Ashby knows Ed will figure it out. Mr. Mark distributes their papers the next day, and since Ed ended up writing about the napkin salesman, he gets just a B+. In the locker room, Ed gets an idea and asks the footballer Smits if he wants to get his scholarship. If so, Ed is his best shot, as he's the fastest in his position. Understanding what he means, Smits asks Valchek to leave Ed alone and let him do his thing. Coach Bruton gives the team a speech and asks them to look at pictures of all ex-players and imagine what they would say about the current team. He asks them to understand their legacy and work hard to continue it for their match the next day. He keeps urging them to work harder and gets a lot of enthusiastic responses from the players. Ed is excited about his father coming for his match and waits at the airport for him. Ted doesn't turn up and tells him on the call that he got caught up again. Ed is disappointed and frustrated and just rips the cardboard in his hands into pieces. Right before the match, Ed is nervous and starts blabbering uncontrollably with his mom watching. Alois wishes Ed good luck, and he is happy she is there. When Ashby notices June leaving for the match, he decides to tag along, to be there for Ed. The match starts, and Ashby notes how fast Ed is. He starts a polite conversation with June, and she discusses how hard it is to date in her age. When she asks Ashby about his dating life, he admits he tried dating after his wife passed, but it was very hard, so he dropped the idea. The team continues to rely on Ed, and finally, he takes the catch and helps them win the game. Ed is suddenly a hero, and everyone in the team loves him. He meets his mom and Ashby after the game, and they are both very proud of him. Alois then comes to congratulate him and meets his mother. June wants to take them for dinner, but all his teammates come to steal him for a party. At the party, everyone loves him, and as he gets very drunk, a blonde girl comes and takes him away. Ed gets excited about getting a gift from his father, and is even happier when he mentions coming for the Sacred Heart game. He then goes to pick up Ashby and tells him about the gift he got. Ashby wants to be very blunt with Ed, and informs him that his father doesn't care about him, and doesn't deserve to be in his life. Ed acknowledges that he disappoints him too much, but also justifies it by trying to tell Ashby how hard he is trying to make a new family. Ashby doesn't want him to rationalize being a victim, and grow up to take care of his mother, even when Ed doesn't want to listen to anything against his father. They reach their destination, and Ashby spots his other colleague. He silently chases after him, but gets interrupted by a call from Ed, who is hurt by what Ashby said about his father, and starts abusing him about not being there for his own daughter when she lost her life to a overdose. Ashby drops the call, leaving Ed fuming, and he decides to return home in Ashby's car, making Ashby take a cab home without finishing his job. He notices the car keys thrown outside his house, and enters into a room with pictures of his daughter. Alois meets Ed, and informs him about her observations of the game and how she noticed how he always avoided getting hit. She also asks him about his sexcapade with Betty from the party. Alois is jealous, even if she understands they are not together, but Ed also tries to justify how drunk he was at the party. He tells Alois he likes her, but she feels it is a very mean thing to say at that point. Ed reaches home and notices how upset his mom looks. June is crying, and tells him about getting stood up at the restaurant by John, and feeling embarrassed about it. Just when Ed starts consoling her, she gets a call from Jerry asking her to meet him, and she gets happy again. This irritates Ed, but June doesn't understand why he is upset. June feels it is something to do with Ashby, and goes to confront him the next day, directly asking if he is abusing her son. Ashby is a little offended, but assures her nothing like that is happening. Ed spots her talking to Ashby, and when she informs him about the conversation, he gets more irritated and asks her to stay out of his life. He also comments on him staying out of her sexcapades, which takes June by surprise. She honestly informs him that she likes sex, and wants to find love, and she is doing everything to make it happen. Ed is upset, because he feels none of these men deserve his mother. Ed and his team are not able to concentrate, and their coach points it out to them and makes them take some tests. After the tests, Ed is invited to Alois's place by the teammates, since she wants to check their brains. Alois informs them about the protocol, and what she will be assessing in their brains to check for damage. Smits volunteers to go first, and starts misbehaving with Alois, telling her to take her top off in exchange for him letting her examine his brain. Alois tries to defend herself, and Ed feels awkward, but because he is among his teammates, he is unable to take a stand for her. She does end up pulling her top up to show him, so they stop making comments about her, which makes Ed feel worse about not stepping up. Ed is upset about what happened, and even his dad doesn't pick up his call. When he heads out of his room, he sees Jerry come out of his mother's room in just his shirt. Ed decides to go to his mom's room to confront them. He asks Jerry about his intentions with his mother, since he doesn't want her to be mistreated again. Jerry explains that he knows June is dating other people, but he has started falling for her. Satisfied with his answer, Ed decides to leave the room. Ed heads out and spots Ashby lying on the floor, and rushes to check on him. Ashby wakes up, and is pleased Ed is talking to him again. He also wants pancakes, and asks Ed to come with him. Ed is touched when he realizes Ashby has been watching all his games. Ed apologizes for being rude about his daughter, and Ashby finally explains the story to him. He talks about how troubled his daughter was, and how much she needed him to be there for her, because she knew he would keep her safe. He confesses that he was out for work when his daughter took and regrets not being there. He insists he needs to make things right, so he can go to heaven and be with her. Ed and Ashby then discuss Alois over pancakes, and how much he regrets not doing anything to help her. Ashby still insists bluntly that Ed needs to step up and be a man. Ed expresses how important it is to maintain a relationship with his teammates, and how confusing it gets with Alois involved, since she hates all of them. Ashby doesn't sugarcoat it, and tells Ed directly he needs to not be a coward. Ed drops Ashby off to see another friend, Kenrick, the third ex-colleague Ashby had to meet. He confronts him while he is swimming, and asks him to get out of the pool. He knows why Ashby is there, and takes out a gun and shoots at him. It partially hits his arm, but Ashby is determined to find him and finish him. Meanwhile, an excited Ed in the car calls up Alois to ask for a second chance to explain himself, and makes plans to meet her. He gets excited when Alois agrees to meet him, just when Ashby shoots Kenrick too, but not before he manages to take a picture of him. Ed gets a call from Ashby to drive to the end of the block to pick him up. Ashby walks out and gets in the car with his arm bleeding, which takes a while for Ed to notice, but when he does, Ashby assures him he will survive. Ed jokes about driving a getaway car when he spots police nearby, but his smile is wiped off when he realizes he is actually driving a getaway car. Ed is shocked when Ashby confirms that he just shot someone, but wants Ed to keep driving, if they both don't want to go to prison. Ashby fills him in, and Ed is shocked Ashby has recently murdered 2 people. Ashby insists he has to right the wrong by ending the people behind the madness, but Ed doesn't see how it is right to murder someone. Ashby also informs him that the third man, Entwistle, will send his people to finish Ashby soon. Ed is worried, and suggests that he could run away with Ashby to get away from all this. Knowing that Ashby wants to find Entwistle too, Ed threatens to call the cops. Ashby finally tells him about having just a few weeks left of his life. Ed knows he is serious, but refuses to believe him and talks about getting proof. He reaches Alois's house, apologizes for being a coward, and confesses that he has feelings for her. His heartfelt apology convinces her, but she is still hurt, which is why Ed promises to never do anything like that again. As a gift for her, he also offers to let her check Ashby's brain. On their way back after the scan, Ed knows for sure that Ashby isn't lying, and wonders what will happen. Ashby asks him to make a stop, and visits the priest he met before in the church. Since the church is getting fumigated, the priest agrees to listen to his confession in his house. Ashby confesses to have murdered 95 men, which utterly shocks the priest, and he doesn't know how to respond. The priest insists that to ask for forgiveness, Ashby needs to be truly sorry for his sins. He also understands that Ashby thought he was doing the right thing, and Ashby explains that he believed in something, which is why he is sorry to have led the life he did. When the priest asks if Ashby believes he is a good man, Ashby knows he has tried his best. The priest then absolves Ashby of all his sins. Back in the car, Ed is still processing, and assures Ashby that he will let him end his the way he wants to, but asks him to promise not to shoot Entwistle. Ashby knows how important this is to Ed, and agrees to let Entwistle go. Ashby meets Entwistle in a public place in the morning, and offers him tea. Entwistle pretends to not know anything about Ashby, and how he murdered Peter and Kenrick. Ashby shows Entwistle a green stamp, and how it has been employed to poison people. Entwistle then notices another green stamp in his tea and panics. Ashby is still relaxed, and informs him that he is letting him go, since he promised someone he wouldn't harm him. Coach Bruton gives the boys another speech in the middle of the game, and asks them to focus and maintain the legacy of the men and posters. But Ed is done, and he gets up to make his own speech about not following the legacy, and just focusing on making it their own game instead. The team is inspired by this, and cheer for Ed. As Ed and his team passionately resume the game, Ashby gets a visit from Entwistle's people. He takes them to a forest where he walked with his wife, as Ed finally manages to win the game for his team, and cannot contain his excitement. He spots Alois and runs towards her, to kiss her passionately after the game. Ashby is right where he wants to be, and confident about what he is doing. As he prepares to take a bullet, he happily looks at the skies, and is excited to reunite with his family. After the match, Ed comes running to Ashby's house to inform him about his victory. He looks around and tries to find him, but Ashby is nowhere. He then finds a note in his house and opens it. Ashby explains what happened to him, and in his last note, gifts the car to Ed. He also asks Ed to execute his will, so that all his assets are transferred to the heirs of Garrett Hughes. He hopes to go in peace and reach heaven. At his funeral, Alois is with Ed throughout, and when the ceremony is done, Ed pours alcohol over his coffin, which is right next to where his daughter and wife were buried. As his last words of wisdom, Ashby suggests that Ed should not be scared of anyone in life, and care the most about people who love him. With this thought, Ed is happy and with Alois, and drives off with her in his new car from Ashby.